Hello, everyone. Welcome to this symposium, a one-day symposium, and the symposium title, Legacies of Care, Failures, and Emerging Solidarities. My name is Keng Sen Ong. I'm the artistic director of this symposium, and I welcome all of you, all revered ones. So I won't go into all the different titles, but we have amongst us ministers, princes, academics, artists, historians, journalists, all the NGO workers that we know and love, and foundation partners, of course, the Prince Claus Fund and our partner Bawa Trust. And I hope I've not missed everyone out, but every one of you is a revered one. So, dear revered ones, welcome. And I would first like to begin with inviting Marcus DeSando, our director of the Prince Claus Funds, to step up and to address us shortly. And after that, we'll take it from there. So you'll see me again after Marcus, but first of all, welcome to Marcus, and please give him a warm round of applause. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. So I was just saying to Keng Sen now that he's done everything I was supposed to do, so all I have to say is just wave and go and sit down, right? I hope everybody's warm and really excited to be here, so welcome all. We are really very excited as a Prince Claus Fund to be here in Sri Lanka on our first inaugural Prince Claus Fund Symposium, Biennial Symposium. And this time around is organized in collaboration with the Geoffrey Bawa Trust. I also want to welcome all of those that have traveled from far to be here with us, and also welcome some of our honored guests, as Keng Sen has already said. Honorary Chair of our board, His Royal Highness Prince Constantine of the Netherlands. The Chair of our board, Ila Kasim, sitting over there. Ambassador for International Cultural Corporations at the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Davy van der Weert. And the Dutch ambassador in Colombo, Bonnie Obach. Great, and then also all of you are just as revered as Keng Sen said, and really very happy to have you all here. As a fund, we have been tirelessly working on finding ways on how we can engage global cultural practitioners who inspire to make this world more peaceful, equitable, and inclusive. We hope that our biennial symposium will serve as a catalyst for us and for all of you to find ways to address urgent societal challenges and stimulate international solidarity across such global issues. Our aim here is both simple and, as you will find out as the day goes by, also complex in the kind of conversations that are going to be had. To be a facilitator in something that we find to be one of the most important aspects of our work, which is enabling knowledge exchange, which the minds that are gathered here today are a great example of that and represent. Our approach as a fund is holistic, and our community of changemakers is a diverse, ever-growing, and interconnected ecosystem. As an organization, we aim to decentralize this ecosystem by enabling and investing in individuals and institutions that support cultural practitioners globally, by facilitating events as such that allows knowledge exchange and dialogue among global changemakers, by speaking up about the values that drive us as an organization, by continuously advocating for the transformative power of culture that can change society for the better. Now more than ever, in the face of great tragedies unfolding, as we are all experiencing all over the world, we need collaboration and dialogue. At the Fund, we recognize culture being a strong catalyzer of such exchange, and we are incredibly humbled to greet so many of you that are inspiring changemakers here today in Colombo. I want to thank our dear collaborators, the Geoffrey Bawa Trust and the Artistic Director Keng Sen Ong, for co-curating this symposium with us. without you, this event would not have been possible. It has been in almost the whole year in planning, and it's really wonderful to see how it's all come together. So thank you very much. I would be remiss if I do not acknowledge my team members as well, Fariba Darakshani and Fernando Montero, who have really worked tirelessly with the partners here to make sure that this event goes as smoothly as possible. And of course, my whole team, I have a lot of them in the room today, which is wonderful. So I want to thank all of them. Laura Urbo, who has been tirelessly working to get the press here. So it's really exciting to see. I can't wait to take it all in, and I hope that you are too. So thank you again for coming. And before I leave, I just would like to invite Devi Vanivir to come on stage and give a few words. And I hope to engage with all of you as the day goes by, and have a good day. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Good morning, dear friends and distinguished guests. My name is Devi van der Weert, and I'm Ambassador for International Cultural Cooperation at the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And well, I'm so thrilled to be here, and I keep remembering our start yesterday night at the dinner. It was such a vibrant meeting of people that hadn't seen each other for years, and it was just so inspiring to see what the Prince Claus Fund is really all about. It is about the network, isn't it? And it is about laying these connections, and that is exactly what we are here for. And I would like to really thank Marcus and your whole PCF team, and of course the Geoffrey Bawa Trust for hosting this wonderful group. And you might know that the symposium also coincides with a handover ceremony of cultural artifacts that were taken from Sri Lanka by the Dutch during the colonial era in these coming days. And with this return, what we do is we seek to redress injustices from the past, but we also want to turn a page and start afresh, because we really think that it is also a way to deepen our cooperation in the field of cultural cooperation with Sri Lanka. And it is also a possibility to do more research together in the field of provenance research. So there are really many possibilities to use this opportunity. And we are very thankful for our Sri Lankan hosts, who are also looking at this return as a festive occasion. They also see it as an opportunity to find new ways of cooperating each other in a spirit of equality and in a spirit of honest exchanges. And I believe that this is also very much the spirit of this symposium, because one of the goals in our international cultural policy is to really use the positive force, the power of arts and culture to tackle commonly faced challenges we all face as humanities. And I remember yesterday night we were talking with Maya about climate justice, and Shahidul, you were telling me about the river that you have been fighting for in Bangladesh, and how important it has been to have artists work on this together, and how you are really a changing force there. So the power of intercultural dialogue and free exchanges between creative thinkers are really essential to guide us in these directions. And this is actually what we will be discussing also in these coming days. And I really think it is so important that we can also share these experiences, because we see that worldwide free speech and artistic expression are really under threat. And this is not particular to one country, it is something that we are all facing. The space for critical thought in societies is shrinking, and there we really need to become as creative as we can, and their art is really a changing factor to safeguard freedom of expression. Because today, global developments are marked by so many uncertainties. For me, one thing is certain: we really need artists and cultural expression to give meaning to our lives and to change also the direction of our countries. So I would like to wish you a very good symposium, and I hope that your discussions will offer us all food for thought. Many thanks, and looking forward to what is coming after.
Hello, everyone. So I'm about to start to just sketch today very quickly and to give a sense of why we chose to work in this way. We felt that it would be good to try to bring everybody together for just one day, actually, to have a snapshot of what's happening in South Asia today. And what we've gathered today is a group of intergenerational practitioners. It was very important to bring in some of the laureates that the fund has given awards to, and as well as to find the practitioners who are working today in the last 5 years very deeply, sometimes with underground networks, and sometimes with quite urgent political activist aims. And so the morning and the afternoon is divided in that way, and there are 7 panels. I'm just going to run through the panels. We are starting first with the panel of livable societies. It's in your booklet, in the middle, so it's very well designed, it's right in the middle. And we're going to start with livable societies, climate, water, air, and us. And this will be, then the second panel is the human-made, different kinships, memorialization, food politics. And you know that all the problems we have today is actually man-made, right? So in terms of the racial politics that's being practiced in different parts of the world, as well as, of course, the difficulties with memorialization, how we go into the future and what we remember of the past through historicization. And unfortunately, our last speaker for this panel, Lipi from Bangladesh, she's unable to make it because she's ill. And she was going to talk to us about the positive effects of the man-made, which is food politics, and how kitchens are being created by displaced peoples all around the world. And this is an art project that Brito from Bangladesh has been doing in different parts of the world. And after that, we have a coffee break, and we go on to the third panel in the morning, which is documenting and empowering the context. So looking at power and agency. And that will be followed by the fourth panel, which is failures and futurities. And we all know that this topic of failures is a very touchy area, but how do we retrieve from failures some positive things that have happened and are happening, and in a way they become the futurities. Futurities meaning speculative futures. They may not be the real future that will happen, but the idea of futurities is that we want to move at this moment into the speculative futurities, which hopefully we can realize. And after lunch, there's a lunch break of 1.5 hours, and we put 1.5 hours because we know that we're going to spill over, so you'll probably have less time for lunch. But in the afternoon, there will be 3 panels, and we begin first with South Asian contemporary experiments in solidarity. What can they look like, and what are their limitations, conditions, legacies, failures? So it's a kind of an afternoon launch into a whole new topic. And I want to thank Aziz Sohail for giving me this title, and it's enshrined forever in this book. And after that is the second panel, and here we look at the human being amidst planetary deterioration. And then we have a coffee break, and we have the last panel, which is international potentialities, looking at the potential possibilities. Again, these potentials may not be realized, but it's up to us to realize them. So that's why we call them potentialities. And we look at parallel activations from around the world, that means beyond the region, and we look at new alliances for repair. And you know, this topic was chosen very carefully because it's a post-pandemic topic, right? And the post-pandemic topic, this has been raging actually, and the topics after decolonization, or we are in the process of decolonization in Europe, where Europe is looking very seriously at what has happened in the colonial past. And this topic is really a topic which we are bringing together here in South Asia. Already this topic has been happening regionally, and it's not the first time is being mentioned, but it's kind of a bridging of these two streams, these two rivers of the European river of the last decade of looking at care and looking at failures and looking at how to move into the future. And at the same time in Asia, this whole thing has been also been very implicit, and now in a way, it's being made very explicit by this conference or by this symposium. So, Legacies of Care, Failures, and Emerging Solidarities. And the backdrop that we are actually, that's surrounding us, the backdrop is this decolonial wave, which we are all part of. And we know that decolonization is not just about the historical past, but there have been colonizations even today between the main races which are in Asia or in South Asia, and the problematics around continued colonization, because colonization has not stopped after the Europeans left. The colonization has continued through different legacies and perpetuated by, of course, present administrations in many different ways. So I think that this is just a kind of a sketch of the day, and I hope that you enjoy today. It's a little bit taxing, especially in the morning with 4 panels, but we felt that it was really important to just put all the little pieces on the table together so that we leave today with a sense of we know what's happening regionally, locally. And this is a post-pandemic movement, the idea of translocal. So the question after the pandemic was that the international, as we know it, has been deeply ruptured. And how can we continue to look at the international in a way that has responsibility, especially looking at this question of how do we deal with the footprints of travel? And so the idea was to look at translocal as a new paradigm, that we no longer look at the international, global, but we look at every local, every locality, and this becomes a mosaic that we are in today, the mosaic of the translocal. What is happening in a specific locality in Pakistan? What is happening is in a specific locality in Kathmandu? What's happening in a specific locality, well, in New Mexico? What's happening in Kosovo? And I think that you would agree possibly that we do need a new paradigm to look at the international. And today we propose the translocal, looking at many different localities and trying to make sense of this mosaic that we are all living in today without immediately resorting to globalization. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the symposium. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. It's quite a thing to follow on Keng Sen, of course, and I think he said lots of the things that I was trying to say. But anyway, the conversation when I was asked to talk about greening architecture, I felt was something that everybody talks about and everybody is familiar with. But for me, I thought perhaps I'll give people a bit of a history lesson to think of a moment when Keng Sen was talking about the translocal, where here in Sri Lanka, what had we been doing about greening architecture, and why have we forgotten some of the things that we had already begun and then gone on to do other things when everything became fashionable to be global. We often forgot what the local was. And I have often been asked to present these views on green architecture and sustainable architecture across the region, often in very cold rooms, not unlike this, and often a few degrees north or south of the equator. You're sitting in this wonderful climate and you're made to be very, very cold. I'm in fact wearing another shirt because it's often cold in rooms like this. And I often start my conversation by saying perhaps we could open a window. And all you really need to do to green your building is to simply open a window. We forget that because we are so caught up in a kind of colonization that we have been put to say, look, what is best for you is technology. We have been colonized in our minds by technology. You can get a cooler room because you have air conditioning. But I think in the end, what we're all looking for, the ultimate greening, will probably happen in a post-apocalyptic world when nature takes over and everything that we are building, everything that we are polluting the world with will kind of eventually be taken over. So there's hope for the globe. Now, whether there's hope for us to witness this is something that we need to think about and question ourselves. But we can perhaps prepare for some of this and maybe see what is coming a little bit by looking at it. And I, of course, was fortunate 30 years ago in working with a man called Geoffrey Bawa, who was an architect here in Sri Lanka, when we built a hotel in the middle of the jungle, where for the first time I understood the idea that as an artist, as an architect, we have huge egos. And we think what we do is complete and finite and perfect. We walk away from it, the great architect. But Bawa left this building actually as quite an ugly building. People criticized him for how horrible the building looked because it was just a framework of concrete columns and beams. But 30 years on, in fact, within 5 years of its completion, we began to see that post-apocalyptic world almost taking over. And I still remember one of the things he told me about the building. He said, Channa, I think this building will be complete only when the bears are sleeping in the rooms and the leopards are walking its corridors. So it was lovely to see over the last 30 years a very simple building, a framework of concrete being taken over by the jungle and taking on its own life. Now, this is something that happened 30 years ago in this little island. We don't talk too much about it, but there's so much to learn from this idea that the objects we make are not finite things. They have histories of their own, they build their own histories. And until, of course, we get to that point when the ultimate greening will start, when we have left it, we need to think of a few things that might help slow that process and help us enjoy our planet and where we live a little bit better. And I think there are 3 ways in which I think buildings can be greened, our environments can be greened. And that is to kind of see if we can use passive methods to maintain these comfort levels that we are always asking for. Switch off our air conditioners and open the windows, perhaps. We can also start constructing things with sustainable, renewable materials. I'll talk about it as we go along. And of course, when we design something, let's think of not just this moment, but into the future, how what we place on the earth can be used by succeeding generations of our people. The whole concept of green building is to reduce the demand, which enables you to use fewer resources to satisfy the same demand, says a developer. So some of the early issues of sustainability, of course, came in that period where we were being colonized in our minds about something called modern architecture. Great work began to come out, of course. This is one of the houses that was built by a man called Le Corbusier in Ahmedabad. We all followed his examples. And this work in Africa shows how buildings can continue to breathe. And in Sri Lanka as well, in the work of Geoffrey Bawa, the Bishop's College Auditorium, unfortunately it was around the corner from here, but it doesn't exist anymore. You began to look at buildings where you didn't even have windows. You just simply had to engage with the environment and you had it all for yourself. The Pires House in Kandy does similar things. And the work of Minette de Silva began to look at creating spaces that you could live in that didn't necessarily have to be closed away from the climate. Of course, everyone will say you can do it in Sri Lanka. And I often respond by saying, that's why I live in Sri Lanka, that you can do all these things. That in fact, all you need are columns and a slab and shelter. And that's really what it's all about. And in a lot of that early work, you see this consciousness of trying to create an environment that is comfortable without resorting to technology beyond what is necessary. And in this early work by Bawa in 1977, the State Mortgage Bank, it's still around, quite close to where we are at the moment. He kind of decided to try to create a tall building which could also breathe, where you didn't have to close the windows. So this consciousness was in us, not because of anything else, I think, because we were an economy that had to think this way. And I was reminded about all of this when last year and the year before, Sri Lanka's economy collapsed into nothingness, and we as architects had nothing to build with. And you said, oh my God, we need to think of other alternative ways of doing it. We can't import air conditioners anymore. I was quite joyful at that moment. But of course, things go back, and here we are now sort of, making what you call LCs, letters of commission or whatever, for bringing air conditioners in. But there was that moment when we had to rethink, perhaps we should look back at what these people were doing, the early architects were doing in Sri Lanka. And that's, of course, an international project that tries to do exactly what Bawa and the others were doing, and that's in Africa. And in Sri Lanka itself, my own house, one tries to sort of open the windows as much as possible. And in this lovely project by Naren Pereira a couple of years ago, the house virtually disappears into a skeleton, and you sort of occupy the landscape in a different way to creating an object that sits in the landscape. If you learn to build with local materials, we have a future, said Francis Kere, the famous architect whose wonderful work in Africa has always inspired me as well. But way back again, Sri Lankans, or people in Sri Lanka, were thinking in that way. This is early researchers and early articles talking about the positive nature of traditional construction. And these things were taken on by the early architects. That's again a page of the book of Minette de Silva, where she's trying to study the construction methodologies of the legacy of construction that Sri Lanka had. Wonderful notes by a man called Ulrich Plesner, who eventually went on to work with Bawa and perhaps brought some of these ideas into Bawa's office. And Minette's own sketches for a beautiful house in close to Dehradun for General Habibullah, it says, a perspective of an entrance using local materials way back in 1958, and her experiments with early tourism architecture, which again begins to use local materials in a way that we today have kind of forgotten to use. Bawa's work, 1960, A.S.H. de Silva's house, you can see that all the materials that are being used here are absolutely local. You have terracotta, floor tiles, timber, and all this also because we were very conscious of the need to use this because our economy didn't allow us to use anything else. We had restrictions on what could be imported, so we began to learn to make a modern architecture, a modern sort of environment for ourselves using what was available around us. So while Bawa's early work sort of perhaps was a reflection of the kind of colonized mind, we all thought international style, that modern architecture as a style was what was good for us. But very quickly we unlearned that and began to look at other ways of doing it. And here in this particular project, by Bawa in Lunuganga, those who will go to Lunuganga will see this. The entire building is made out of recycled materials. Buildings began to be broken up on either side of the Gaul Road as the Gaul Road expanded for traffic, and all of that stuff he collected. And this particular project is entirely out of recycled materials that he picked up on the streets. Of course, today again, this idea of recycling materials has been picked on by younger architects. I mean, I don't know if I can call myself young, but another generation of architects. And as we go along, as you'll go along, you'll see a whole lot of a new generation of Sri Lankan architects picking up on what the older people did, but it's not, I still feel it's not enough. And of course, internationally, we see local materials being used even in tall towers. Here's a building in Norway that's entirely built of timber, which is one of the most sustainable materials we all have. Unfortunately, in Sri Lanka, timber is not promoted simply because we have archaic laws about what trees you can cut and what you can't. So we actually destroy other people's forests by bringing everything from Malaysia or somewhere else. So I think it's something that we need to think about in Sri Lanka, of creating sustainable materials by not simply using archaic laws that stop you from doing things. The greenest building, of course, is the building that's already there, because that's not going to demand any more material from the earth, which we are already beginning to deplete. This early project by Geoffrey Bawa is very interesting because for his previous project, he collected bits and pieces of buildings that were being broken down. In this case, his client had bought a plot of land and the house that's on the left-hand side, or your left-hand side. And what he did was he turned the house inside out. What was on the street, he turned onto the back. And there was a house on the other side of the street, which he then dismantled bit by bit and rebuilt on this, and made it a home for this artist. Lydia Duccini was an Italian artist who lived in Sri Lanka, and Bawa worked with her quite a lot. And this was the home he built for her, by completely recycling and reusing a couple of buildings that was built by the roadside. And of course, we've taken that on, and there's a lot of conservation projects and conservation work going on in Sri Lanka. That was the Independence Arcade, the Dutch Hospital, and of course, internationally, you see this idea that you can actually create an architecture and reuse buildings in a way, and this is in Australia, where only a very small section of the building was removed and a whole other section added, so you can still reuse these buildings. Now, one of the key things about thinking about architecture in this way, and I won't show you images on this, is that we need to think of what are the sustainable materials we can use, how do we use them, how do we manage not to extract more and more from the earth. Plus also, as designers, as architects who make these environments, we have a responsibility to make things that are not for the day. Our egos often make us create buildings that are sort of, twisted and turned and goodness knows what. Most of our star architects create architecture that is good for the day. 20 years down the line, can we shut one door and open another and use it for another purpose? And that's an extreme view, I think, because often, particularly with the architectural press, you are praised for creating this extraordinary imagery. But how long does that imagery last in someone's mind? Can that building go on to serve generation after generation? So this idea that the building that's already built is the most sustainable building can be taken on. And of course, until then, Sri Lanka will continue to build like that, that's the skyline of Colombo. I mean, I was surprised myself going onto the rooftop of somewhere and said, oh my God, that's what it is. Each building so mediocre, so basic, so dull, and no concession whatsoever to the environment. Until, of course, one day the sea levels will probably rise and it will probably disappear, and one day the earth will probably reclaim what we do. Now, all of these conversations, of course, are really about urban issues. One of the things that we have forgotten is that in Sri Lanka, 60% of our people still live in rural areas. Now, there is where we as architects need to create some kind of awareness. No, we can't go and tell people how to live, but we can create an awareness of the kinds of materials you might use and the kinds of structures we might make, so that in the future we might have a better environment to live in. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm waiting for this moment when all our cities might begin to look like that. And in many ways, while we live in tall and dense cities, we were talking about densities the other day, how important densities are for urban environments, because otherwise we'll sort of occupy the whole of the surface of the earth. But it can also be densities like this. So when it comes to greening, these are my thoughts about where we should be going as architects. Give up our egos and perhaps let nature take over. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for inviting and making me be part of the Prince Claus first Biennial Symposium. It's also an absolute delight to meet South in South. It's like one large umbrella of shared politics, wit, landscape. My practice stems from a very contested atmosphere, which leads me to spatial advocacy and interventions. In my practice, I have constantly advocated and challenged existing built environment and aspiration of new skyline in a city which constantly is in decay. So maybe my presentation may resonate to the one previously shared. To set the lens, I'm looking at architecture and urban development practices. Every day, people make and remake their city by the ways in which they use the city. There's a chance for all of us to experience the unexceptional power which we each wield every day. The idea behind freedom to experience spatial order is in the city is as much created by the everyday use, activity, actions of its citizens as it is by those large-scale decisions that are made about its laws, its policies, its architecture and design, its timetables, its civic symbols. Today's presentation, Contested Watery Ground, is divided into 4 sections focusing on water politics, land use, which led to the making of Milap, a documentary film featuring women from south of Pakistan and the stories of their lives being impacted due to negligent urban planning and its consequences to the river and the sea. Milap is an ongoing conversation with the land and the coast. I started the journey in 2019, where I started documenting the politics of land, reclamation in the urban periphery of Karachi. This led me to understand the term development in Delta region between the urban and the rural. Field notes from the sweet water of River Indus to salt atmosphere of the Arabian Sea coast led to develop a film, share the stories of Mai Bashira, Mai Mukhtara, Shambai, Mai Zainab Dholwali are the prime agents in my film. The aim to talk about environmental degradation, land rights, human, non-human epistemologies through poems, songs, and inherited knowledge. I won't go too much in detail about the film, but I would like to focus on the making, rather the process of the film, how I arrived. Can I have the... So just to touch upon the fractured landscape, Pakistan, with the world's 5th largest population, struggling with spiking inflation, mounting international debt, and an unstable political situation. But the damages caused by the climate crisis are a much larger challenge for Pakistan. Floods of August 2020 to 2022 are of monumental scale of devastation and human suffering, which right now is difficult to understand and digest. The damage due to floods in Pakistan is estimated at 14.9 billion, equivalent to 4.8% of the GDP. As a direct consequences of the floods, around 9 million people have likely been pushed into poverty. The most heart-wrenching aspect of the flood is that they aren't entirely unprecedented. In my work, I'm focusing on displacement. It is important to tell the story of Saint Khwaja Khizr, the ultimate guide of the coast, who safeguards the fundamental ecosystem. Khizr's presence is found in various locations along the underdeveloped areas of the coast and the river. His presence is celebrated at various geographic locations, some physical, some imaginary. But his ultimate resting space is in the upper Indus River, in Sakhar, on a small island. Sacred is often described in the context of religious beliefs or tradition in rural and marginal context. Yet, according to environmentalist Divya Gopal's contribution, she states, sacredness exists in modern, contemporary, and urban context and plays an important role for maintaining ecosystem services for the benefit of the people in the city. Since the notion of sacredness can be interpreted beyond religious beliefs and traditional cultures, but also serve as a reminder in a form of memory and continuity of historical, social, ecological interactions. Khwaja Dul Darya is one of the names of the river Indus. Upon asking, one of the fishermen responded, Sindhu Sai, river Indus, Khwaja Khizr, and Khwaja Dul Darya are one entity, Hasti. The word entity, Hasti, challenges the imagination of the river, shaped by the state and the capitalism, by awakening our memory and subconsciousness, and makes us think of rivers beyond the material source of water. Today, liquid grounds are controlled by man-made infrastructures, and land is controlled for speculative development. We desperately need new methods for imagining the relationship between human and nature. Thinking with water, narrate the ecological breakdown through humans and non-humans living on the fractured watery landscapes and ecological displacements of wetlands, mangroves, swamps. It's important for me here to highlight that public-private partnerships in a form of geopolitics through enhancing economic corridors as a form of contemporary colonial framework, or be it impose monoculture farmland or to create real estate, displacement is inevitable in all of them. Slow violence is delayed violence, and its effects are only visible after a while. Looking at sacred geography of the urban-rural estuary, where the river, sweet water, meets the coast, salt water. Local fishermen communities and villages who work on these vast salt pans 6 months of the year in harsh environments. It is important to talk about the alienation which is related to capitalist modes of production. The lens of extraction of natural resources, capitalistic pursuits, environmental degradation, and impacts on decrease in water flowing down the Indus, siltation which prevents seawater from intruding inland by creating a raised shoreline, projects encounters with extractivism in the delta, specifically at understanding salt through two aspects: man-made salt pans and the global crisis of seawater level increasing, leaving the wastelands in the delta with a high level of salt water table in green pastures. The process of containing water in pans from 6 degrees to 25 to 30 degrees acidic water, workers with least amount of protective gear suffer from many ailments. Skin burns and blindness is one of the major ones. Where the salt grounds are a method of survival for these villages, it is also the alienation of the worker from products of his labor. The alienation that's felt in the course of production as exploitation by salt lake owners and violation of labor laws. We ourselves in between Delta and south of Punjab are here to understand salt and its relation to the land and water through an ethnographic exploration.
ਇਹੋ ਜਾਨ ਦੇ ਹਾਸੇ ਪੁਰਖਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਮਿੱਟੀ ਵਿਕਦੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਪਾਣੀ ਵਿਕਦੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਕੋਈ ਕਿਆ ਸਮਝੇ ਅਸਾਂ ਕਿਆ ਆਖੂੰ ਮਿੱਟੀ ਕਿਆ ਥਈ ਹੈ पानी क्या थे हिन। कैपिटलिज्म तां हद ही मुका छड्डी है, मिट्टी वेची जा रहे हैं असां, अपनी भी ते धरती दी भी। थां थां हाउसिंग सोसाइटीज़, सड़कां, शहर वड्डे होंदे जा रहे, खा रहे पिंडां नूं, हरियावल नूं, रुखां नूं। दो दरिया ते पूरे वेच छड्डे सन, रहिंदियां दा भी नहीं हाल। रावी दा शुमार दुनिया दे जहरीले तरीन दरियावां विच है। सतलुज विच इंडिया पानी ते नहीं छड्डदा, अपनियां फैक्ट्रियां दा गंद जरूर छड्डदा है। चनाब ते झेलम नाल भी कोई चंगी नहीं कर रहे। सिंध विच कोटरी तो अगे पानी कोई नहीं। दरिया दी जिया जंत किवें बचना। डैम्स राहीं दरियावां ते कंट्रोल एक पूरी सियासत हो रही। बस जिवें उतावला हो गया इंसान। हवा जहरीली, धरती जहर, पानी जहर। हजे भी जे समझ गए है ताकत वाले ते कुछ सोचा जा सकता। दरिया बारे, धरती बारे, हवा बारे। नहीं तो समंदर समझा लेगा आप। वधदा खारा पानी कुदरत नूं आउंदा है अपने आप नूं मुड़ नवां करना।
So the second part of the video, where my research partner, Abuzar Madhu, shares his field notes in Punjabi, talking about river Ravi and Satluj, talking about control and surveillance. I will relate infrastructural imagination through the concept of the fish, which represents the fisherman community. Palla, Hilsa, a fresh river fish, is the Samandri Badshah, king of the sea, a monsoon species that inhabits the ocean's coastline at the apex of delta. Palla spends most of their life in ocean and migrates to the river of the delta to breed, a spawning migration from salt water to sweet water. Here, the fish, a non-human entity, is victim to slow violence occurring in Indus River. Today, Palla suffers from traveling to its patron due to infrastructural zoning, irrigational interventions, unethical fish farming has resulted in shortage of hilsa. I'm coming to my last part, which is the salinity and toxicity, leading to a very important person in my film, Mai Bashira, talks about critical knowledge and spatial justice. Mai Mukhtara emphasizes countless times on the word boo, a physical experience of witnessing toxicity through smell of the river. And the fish, immediately our attention went to the term boo. River, which is a metaphor for life, can that carry stench? This cannot be smell of the rivers. It's felt as if Mai had described the cruel patriarchal and capitalistic system with the metaphor of boo. This system has filled human with greed and lust, stench of greed and lust which is not of my rivers, as she says.
साड़ी जेरा रोज़ी भी लोग छीनी फिर दे नसी किधर जाइए ठेके होना कन्या चौक के जाने तो सानू वो भी लोग तंग कर दे ऐसा किथे जाइए ये पानी जो तो डैम ना लोगों ने बंद किते डैम बंद कर दिया इतने पानी किथों आंदा हैगा डैम ना करे ना बंद तो पानी तो चलता सी पर सुथरा भी आंदा सी तो हुण सानू की पता चंगा पानी है माड़ा पानी है अस इस वास्ते तो रुले फिरदे सी मन्नत ही मनदे सी सारा कुछ ही होंदी सी इत्थे सारा कुछ दुनिया देगा पका पका ते बनदी सी भी दुलदरिया खाजा है जिंदा वली है इस जिंदा वली नूं उन्हां डक छोड़िया बर्बाद कर दिता है
Pakistan has a very diverse landscape which requires different planning in different regions. It is extremely important to understand the politics of water and land through the voice of the community. Their voice needs to be part of the planning schemes. It is now critical to draw cross-sectorial linkages and impacts of climate change by centering on solidarities and alliance by accommodating marginalized communities into planning processes. In the land of the shrines, trails along the Indus River, where geography is considered sacred and the relationship is beyond economic transaction. As an architect and spatial advocate, I would conclude on the query, does Pakistan, I can't hear myself. As an architect and spatial advocate, I would conclude on the query, does Pakistan need to apply global development methodologies or spatial democratic justice? In climate catastrophic atmosphere, it is now fundamental function to understand the sacredness through lens of care management. And in this, my view has become more urgent than ever. What questions do we ask? What stories do we share? Whose voices do we listen to in order to raise infrastructural consciousness? How can we learn to imagine more community-based infrastructures for living with deeply wounded planet, but also its vulnerable creatures and matter? Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. It seems like the rain gods really are showering us with blessings, and it seems very opportune that Mazhar should have been before me with the lovely rain. So yeah.
Hello, everyone. I think we should take a pause because of the rain, right? It's quite loud. Are you okay? Let's take a coffee break. No? Good? What? I can't understand. Coffee break or go on? Go on? Okay, go on. Coffee break? No, only one.
So, right. So good morning, and thank you for having me here, Prince Claus Foundation. I'm the director of Khoj, and I've been with Khoj for 25 years. Khoj is a contemporary art space based in New Delhi. And over the last couple of years, and probably over many years, some of the fundamental questions we've asked is, what is art? What does art do, and what can art be? But I think in the last 10 years or so, or even the last 7, 8 years, the socio-political situation in India has been so difficult that I think it has pushed us to say, what should art do? Not just a speculative inquiry of what art can do, but what should it do? Into the mic. Can you hear me better? Should I shout? All right. Just to say that over the years, these are some of our questions, but over the years, we've really pushed ourselves to say, what should art do? And we feel that's a really important question given the current socio-political situation across the world, actually. I'm going to talk about the air pollution in Delhi, a very prosaic thing. But I think we started by understanding that to live in New Delhi is to be in constant and intimate communication with toxicity. And really today, the AQI when I left was 450. The normal has to be under 2, and that's what we breathe. That's the air we breathe. We started 3 years ago, in fact, with a small seed grant from the Prince Claus Foundation, a project called Does the Blue Sky Lie? Oh, sorry. And we try to focus on this. Can man live elsewhere other than in air? We did a series of projects. I'm going to cut short because, you can hear. We did a series of projects over 3 years, and the first inquiry really was a public intervention, which was an air expo. We did an exhibition, we did a series of talks, and then we did a staged hearing very much a fictional real hearing with the artist Zulekha Chaudhary. Air Expo, this was the first episode set up in a mall. And the first episode of Does the Blue Sky Lie was Expo 2022, a fictional space, much like a real-life trade fair, selling ideas and visions of what our houses, technologies, and imaginations for a better atmospheric future may look like. It asked, in an age of hyper-capitalism, what does it mean when our solutions to crises also unfold in the same capitalist fold that generated those problems to begin with? And there we were in a mall, talking about consumption and talking about air. We did a series of projects. This was really for the public there. And we had the guide smog smelling. But we also commissioned a game for several people where we talked about the difficulty and the nuance of what do you do when it's economy versus environment versus human rights. For example, as I speak, we were told all construction was banned because of the air quality. What happens to the human labor and what happens to economy? And what were those questions that you needed to ask? We also did an exhibition as an art space demanded that we do. But really what I would like to speak about is the fourth one. This was My House is Ill, which talks about technology and how it does not work. From one room to the other, the live sensors gave different AQIs. So, you know, when we put on an air purifier, and we had air purifiers in all the rooms, we were talking nonsense because actually the air that we are breathing is really, really toxic. It did not change, except very close to the air purifiers. We had a series of lectures. But this is the one that I'd like to talk more about, which was about rights of nature. As we know, life is a complex and fragile, and bodies and ecologies interwoven with each other in their vulnerabilities. But when life is understood only as human in its narrowest definition, how can we reinvent the terms of what and who counts? And this was episode 4, which took the form of a fictional staged National Green Tribunal. In India, we have something called the National Green Tribunal, which was set up in 2010. And we worked with real lawyers to build a petition, which the hearing explored the contentious issues pertaining to the air quality of the Delhi National Capital, NCR. The National Green Tribunal, established in 2010, has been set up under the National Green Tribunal Act as a statutory body to deal with environmental cases. And the project employed the laws and protocols. So the way we made this, we had an entire brief made for the lawyers, by the lawyers, for real judges to look at what we were doing. The central focus of the petition was to integrate rights of nature as an expansion of right to life, as enshrined in Article 21 of the Constitution of India. As you know, that in India, I mean, the right to life is there in Article 21, but it's assumed that the right to life talks about human life and not about non-human life. And in fact, in 2017, the High Court of India actually was very progressive, and I was surprised to learn when we did our research that India actually has very progressive environmental laws. Whether they are kept up is a different matter. But in 2017, the High Court of Uttarakhand, which is one of the states in India, ruled that the rivers Ganga and Yamuna were declared jurisdictic legal, and they had legal personhood. And that meant that they actually had legal personhood, and you could fight for those rights. It was the first step towards building the rights of nature. However, the Supreme Court stayed that, saying that right to personhood implies, and I'm not a lawyer, so lawyers in the audience, please correct me, but right to personhood implies that you take full responsibility. But who takes responsibility if a river overfloods? Or as we have just seen, that there are widespread floods which a person or organizations have no control over. So actually you move towards rights of nature, and rights where it is a community that is always involved in bringing and taking decisions before anything is done, before any kind of development activity is done. And that was the move for it. We, of course, are stopped in tracks in India. But places like Bolivia, Ecuador, even New Zealand actually have rights of nature enshrined in their constitution, where ecocide is a crime. Anyway, what we tried to do was really build. There were 3 of us who made this application: the artist, Zulekha Chaudhary, who's a theatre director, and who's worked with us on similar projects, where she's really been concerned about the performativity of law. There was us, Khoj, and we got a minor, because really it is the future of young people that was really important. According to the rights of nature doctrine, an ecosystem is entitled to legal personhood status, and as such has the right to defend itself in a court of law against harms, including environment degradation caused by specific development projects. The rights of nature law brings a biocentric perspective into focus, a position that differs from the anthropocentric standpoint in which nature is valued for the utility or the benefit it produces. And that's why we always call it natural resources. It's never just nature. However, recognizing nature as a legal person with the same rights, duties, and liabilities as humans is not an ideal approach, as I have just explained. Our hearing, and this is where we worked for almost a year and a half, where we went, one thing that I did forget to say, which is very important, is that the blame for the horrible air quality in 3 months in India, and actually Lahore, is laid squarely on the farmers in Haryana and Punjab, which are neighboring states, because they burn their crops for the next crop. So they need to burn that. And that stubble burning comes into Delhi, which is a narrow, is almost like a valley, and settles there in winter. Now, the fact is, if you go back historically, because we went and did research and met many farmers' unions in Punjab, at least 2 or 3, and they said, we don't want to burn it. But if you go back in time, starting with the Green Revolution, we were actually told to burn. We were told to plant rice, when actually rice was never supposed to be planted in the north. That was a southern thing, but there was a lot of natural rainfall. That was not what we were doing. And today, Punjab and Haryana are the rice bowl of India. And so this is what had happened 30, 40 years ago, which is a historical wrong that needed to be corrected now. And now you're telling us we can't do it, what about our livelihoods? So that's where it all began. And so what we did, we included 3 practicing lawyers, some of whom had drafted this, 3 subject expert witnesses. And we were really fortunate to get one, a policy person, Tarini Mehta, who has been advocating for rights of nature in India. We had a public servant who was the head of the pollution board in Punjab, but he was now retired. And we had, as well as 3 artists. Each of the artists had a relationship with land and were farmers. So we had Tukral and Tagra, who was a duo, who raised concerns. And they, by the way, represented a fictional farmers' union. So basically, Tukral and Tagra raised concerns of women belonging to the Indian agrarian community and their burden of overdue debts due to farmer suicides. You do know we have this horrible statistic of one every 9 minutes or 20 minutes, one farmer suicide in India. I mean, that's the rate of farmer suicides in India. And so they had built a game on what it means to be in debt by playing a board game where after 20 minutes you exited because you could either survive with your debt or you couldn't. We also had Shweta Bhattal, who was a trained artist but worked in a farm. She's gone back to work with women farmers in her homeland with her father's farm. And then we had Randeep Madok, his documentary film, which he screened parts of, where he comes from what is known as landless labor. So you have farmers. Who is a farmer? I mean, we went back to basic questions. A farmer is somebody who holds land rights, is what we discovered. So if you work on the farm, till the farm, do all the hard work, you don't have rights. And that was landless labor. And he was a son of one of them, and he'd made a beautiful film called Landless, which we screened. And it was here where we had this screening, and I'd like to share the film with you. Just 2 minutes of that.
request you all to please rise.
This case highlights the difference between urban India and rural India.
Air quality already is severely compromised in Delhi. A stern action is required to be taken to implement absolute prohibition on the stubble burning.
The government, with its policies of bringing in high-yielding varieties of rice and wheat, encouraged farmers to grow it instead of our traditional crops. Nobody in the government thought of the consequences of this change, so we have no option but to burn it.
Whether it be Delhi, whether it be the Himalayas or anywhere in the world, people need clean air, people need clean water. As of now, we are using the resources of 1.5 Earths.
So Honorable Supreme Court has said that we humans are not the center of this universe.
When the development was affecting the environment, now even the environment has started affecting the development. So nature has to be the mainstay of all policy making.
Every farmer is aware what are the side effects of stubble burning because they are the first sufferer.
किसान अवेयर हो रहा है वो इनू कटा रहा है और वो अपने आप कटा रहा है किसी सजा तो डर के नहीं कटा रहा है.
So if we burn it, they complain about it. But they don't complain about it when they sit on a dining table and eat the rice we produce. They never say, thank you, you're feeding the nation. But they will say, you are burning stubble, so punish him. So my argument is, outright it should be dismissed.
Today we must issue a direction from this podium that the other 70% who pollute this country day in and day out must also face the same fines, must also face the same scrutiny, and don't indict only the farming community.
This was a 3-hour performance. We did it in Chandigarh, and that was a very it was a decision we took very thoughtfully. We did not do it in Delhi because it actually affected people in Punjab and that area. We did it trilingual. It was Hindi, Punjabi, and English. And we had farmers' unions, local people, artists. We had about 400 people who sat through a 3.5 live performance where the judges then pronounced their verdict. There were 3 retired judges because, of course, real judges can't sit on a bench. But we had 3 retired judges who were part of this. And so this was really part fiction, part play, part reality. And we got emails in our box later saying, why don't you do this on water? The water table in Punjab has gone down to less than half. Can we do something like this just to raise awareness? Because there was even a sitting judge who was in the audience who said, oh, I didn't know rice was not a local product. Yeah. So the project, just to conclude, interrogated what role art can play as a means of knowledge production in the context of ecological interrelations. Can artists and artworks articulate the web of ecological, cultural, economic, historical, and political relations as legitimate legal narratives in a judicial context? And this was a rehearsal. We hope, with some modification, to put this into the NGT, our entire petition to the NGT, and let's see what happens. Probably get dismissed, but we said we'd do it anyway. Thank you.
After relationship,